Hi guys, a little different video. The reason I'm making this one is because I've been asked many times what my background is. Well, it's pretty diverse. Where do I start? I started like maybe like everyone else. Started fiddling with things when I was very young. I think I was like 9 or 10 when I started fiddling with audio and speakers in general. It started with speakers. Well, maybe not. It started with old radios, but it quickly escalated into speakers. I remember when I was like 9 or 10, I had access to a bunch of old radios in Normandy and Tandbergs and Saba and all kinds of stuff like that. Telefunken, the European brands. And what I used to do was I used to take them apart because a lot of these didn't work. So they were given to me and I was fascinated by them. So people who knew that I was fascinated about this stuff gave it to me. I'm talking about old radios, like 50s, 60s, and 70s radios. And this was right around 79, 78, 79, 80. And that's how I started. I took them apart and saved the things that I wanted to save, like knobs and all that kind of stuff. I took the speakers out and I put those speakers in another cabinet that I made. It started out with cardboard cabinets. Big cardboard boxes with put speakers in them that I reinforced. That's how I started because I didn't have any knowledge on how to do woodworking when I was like 8 or 9 or 10. So it was cardboard box speakers. That was how it was. And once during school and stuff, we had like woodworking and stuff. So once I started learning how to operate saws and band saws and miter saws and all kinds of jigsaws and stuff like that, of course then I started making better cabinets in wood, with a little bit of help from my dad, of course. But that's how I started. That was like very early on. And I remember when if my dad went to the car scrap yard, like pulley parts places and stuff like that, I went with him. He pulled the parts that he wanted for his projects, and I walked around looking in cars to see if there was any speakers in them, and if there was, I pulled them out and I got them for like $2, $3, $4, and I took those speakers home and I built some speakers. So that's basically how I started and how I got into audio. And of course, I had some stereo systems in my boy room, like when I grew up, and so I always liked music before I started doing this. I always listened to music before that. And but I had some Sherwood in the early 80s, like 81, 82. I got a all-in-one Sherwood stereo rack thing for my birthday or Christmas or something like that. And of course that started my whole hi-fi experience, and I took it from there. I was like 11 or 12, I think it was, when I really started taking into hi-fi and home audio. I had turntable, cassette deck, tuner, amplifier, and speakers. So that was combined with the fact that I used old drivers to build speakers with, and I hooked that up to my all-in-one Sherwood thing. Back then it was like thundering and lightning and really pounding, I thought, but it wouldn't compare to anything else that I got into later on. And as years went by, when you get like 12, 13, 14, 15, then you start looking at this in a different way. And that's when I was 13. I think it was 12, 13, something around there, 14 maybe. I remember I found a pair of Cerwin. Well, not a pair. I found one. One speaker. It was a Cerwin Vega speaker behind in a dumpster behind a company. I think someone had, because it was a cheese factory. So the funny part was I doubt the cheese factory had dumped their speakers or one speaker in. It was not even in the dumpster. It was like halfway on side of it, because there was a lot of other stuff put on top or on the bottom. So I think someone had gone there at night and dumped some stuff that they shouldn't have dumped, because it wasn't from the cheese factory, that's for sure. So there was a Cerwin Vega speaker, and I I remember I had like one of those Apache bikes, and it was so hard to get home on a bike because the speaker was so big, and it had all the drivers in it. It was dry rotted. It was like it had to have new foam, because I don't know if they had like blown it or they didn't blow it because it worked. It just needed new foam. It was torn up around the edges. And I think it's been sitting out for a few days. So it had been baked in the sun for a while, for a few days. Because this was in the summertime, during our school holiday. So I want to say it was like in the mid-July. And I remember I was struggling to get that thing home, because I wanted the whole cabinet home. And I didn't want to, and it was quite a distance from my house. Because this was over by the marina where we used to like ride our bikes over to go fishing and stuff. And so that was like a bike ride. If we rode on our bikes, it was like a 8 to 10 minute bike ride. Totally different back then, you know. Bye mom, see you this afternoon or tonight, you know. We were out all day. I remember the Apache bike had that long seat with that thing on the back. Look it up on Google. Apache, DBS Apache, I think it was. Red one. When they had like a big gear shifter or gear lever on the frame on the front, in front of the seat. And I remember I couldn't ride my bike and hold that speaker because it was so big. So I had to put it on top of my bike, and I was holding it, and I was holding the steering thing with my other hand, and I had to walk home with a speaker on top of this. So that's my first encounter with Cerwin Vega. Very, very first encounter. And I took it apart. I took the drivers out, and I put each driver in my other cardboard speaker that I still had. I still had that cardboard speaker back then. The first one I ever made. And I remember I had I didn't have a clue about crossovers back then. So I used the crossover that was in the Cerwin Vega, because most of the speakers that I had used in those cardboard boxes was like full range, was like one driver. Because they were from radios, and back then they rarely had, they were like coaxials. So I took out the crossover, the drivers. I knew by looking at the woofer that wouldn't work, because it was like all torn up. So I made a makeshift from bicycle rubber, inner tube for a bicycle. I used that to build my own foam and surround. But it worked. It wasn't like top-notch thing, and of course it wouldn't be optimum result, but it worked. I got sound in it, and it sounded not good, but it sounded. But the mid-range and the tweeter worked. The only thing that bothers me today is I can't remember the model name on it, because it didn't back then. It was missing. It was missing the sticker or the back plate, I think it was, or something like that. It was like, I can't, and it's so long ago, I can't remember the model number on it, but I want to say my best guess was it was an HED, some type of speaker from the 70s. But I'm going to be very careful about specifically naming a model. but it was really cool. I saved all those parts for many years, and a few years later, because I think this was in like in 85, between 84 and 86, somewhere there. And I remember in 87, I think it was, that's when I got introduced to the D series and D9. A friend of my dad had one pair, and it was awesome. Since then, I always loved the D9, and I mean that was got me hooked on Cerwin Vega, and from there we adventured into me and a friend of mine. We adventured into the AT series a year and a half later. He had a full setup in his bedroom with two pairs of AT100. I wasn't that lucky, but I had some other models. I can't remember what I had. I think it was AT60, and maybe I had the AT12 or the AT80. I think it was something like that. It was early 90s when I started getting my bigger models. And so that's how it started, like early on. Then in 91, 92, well, in the 1990s, another friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine, I got my driver license in 1990, and that's when we started to like get interested in cars, because before that it was mopeds. You know, we had a Suzuki TS50X, that was mine. I had a black one with Cupini steering column and stuff like that, or steering handle, whatever you call it. And so that was like, for me, from 88 to 90 was like I was into the off-road mopeds or 50 cc's. So in the late 90s, early 91, when I started getting my hands on cars, I remember the first car I was driving around in was one of my dad's cars. It was a Volvo 142 or 144 or something like that. An old car that he had renovated from bottom to top, from top to bottom. And there was some original Volvo speakers in there, and that's how I started. I replaced them with stuff that I thought was sounding better. There was put in a Clarion CD player and stuff like that. So it was like slowly building up to the big event when I got my own cars and I could build my own systems. And that was late 91, early 92, where I bought my cars and I started building car audio full time. And I started out with Cerwin Vega and Denon. And then it went into like Phoenix Gold, Cerwin Vega. Then it was this was simultaneously because there were several cars, and then there was like Boston Acoustic and Cerwin Vega, and there was Boston Acoustic and Phoenix Gold, and I even did one with Celestion car audio subwoofers mixed with Boston, because what I did back then was I was very heavy into Hi-Fi Club, and I spent a lot of time there. I was working with a few of the guys down there. Morten was one of them, Morten Bergström. He was driving a black Golf, and he was on the Norwegian Hi-Fi Club and tour, and there was a couple other guys down there too. And of course they had Cerwin Vega, you know, dealership. They were the distributor and importer for both hi-fi and car audio for Cerwin Vega, Phoenix Gold, Boston Acoustic, and Celestion. So I was heavily into that for 3 or 4 years with them. At the same time, in 1992, the spring of 92, I became a certified NASCA judge, which was a department belonging to IASCA. It was like a branch of IASCA. And so I was a judge. I stayed on for a judge for 2.5, 3 years, I think it was, with NASCA. And then I got when EMMA started up, there was something in Europe called EMMA, which was more or less like ho not home theater, but car theater, and you had like surround sound and stuff like that, video. I got a little bit involved with that, not too much because I stayed mostly on with Ayahuasca, and I started to work closer with JVC and Face Linear, Carver, Car Audio, and Scandinavian Distribution, something like that was the company that did them. I was very close with one of the guys at JVC Norway and their car audio department. So I dipped my toes in different areas, in different companies and stuff like that. So that's how I, in the early days of each progress and step forward, what I did. And during the 90s, I built subwoofer boxes for people. I installed car audio for people as a side business, or not side business, but as a side thing. I didn't charge anything for it. They paid for the lumber, they paid for the material. I built it because I loved doing it. I did it for free. I just helped them out, and I think it totaled up to like 4 or 5 or 6 cars a year at least. And then of course the military came along, took away 2 years from me, and in the late, I want to say in the late 90s, it must have been 97, 98, 99. Yeah, those years. I remember me and another guy, a friend of mine, we this was same company that had Face Linear and Carver, and they were the distributors in Norway. I had an inside thing with them, so they told me that, hey, we're gonna clean out our whole warehouse. We have a bunch of Carver amplifiers, we have a bunch of Face Linear, we have amplifiers and Face Linear speakers, stuff like that. We want to know if you want to buy out everything we have. So I contacted my friend because I couldn't do that financially on my own at that time, because I just got myself a new apartment and stuff like that, and wasn't really in a position to do it on my own. So I asked a friend of mine if he wanted to join in, and he said sure. So we bought out everything. I remember we got a little van, and we drove down there. I think it took 2 trips, and we filled it up and we took it home. And so we got a bunch of Carver amps, and we got a bunch of Face Linear amps and speakers, and a lot of Jensen too, because Jensen and Face Linear was the same company, so they were the distributor for both those companies. So we got Carver, we got Face Linear, and we got Jensen. We got a bunch of it, and we spent the next year and a half selling that stuff. So then I got sick at one point too. Back then, we got hospitalized for a little while, and then came back out. And the way things were, I had to take a break from doing this, and I got a side job, or a main job, for a year, no, 8 months. But I was still doing car audio, kind of like on the side, giving advices to people and stuff like that, building a few boxes. And then in 2000, and I was still doing like home audio and pro audio, setting up and rigging up for someone. And I remember doing it down at the city square and at the soccer stadium and stuff like that. And then in 2001, I got in contact with a company who hired me, and I did like company parties and Christmas parties for them, DJing and providing equipment because I had some equipment, pro audio equipment, and I did those Christmas parties and special event parties for companies. It was like 3 or 4 companies. That one thing led to another, and one day, I think it was in the fall, early fall, late summer, early fall of 2000, 2001, something like that. I was sitting online and I was looking through Cerwin Vega's website because I wanted to see if I could buy some speakers, some pro audio speakers, and I wanted to see what they had. And I was like, okay, I knew that CMS Audio had the distribution rights for Cerwin Vega Pro Audio for many years. Probably close to 12, 15 years, if not more. 20 years maybe. And I knew CMS Audio because I knew a lot of the people who worked there. And so I knew they had a lot of the big places in Oslo, like the bars and the discos and the clubs, the hotels. So they had delivered a lot of Cerwin Vega and other brands, amplifier stuff and stuff to these companies, and they had installed it. They had like repair and service agreements running. So, but I wanted to see online what models I could get, and so I could go to CMS and say, hey, I want to order this. So when I'm looking through Cerwin Vega's website, I found what I wanted, and then I go in because I was like, okay, I'm sitting here, so I might as well just look up, because they had like a dealer locator. So I was like, okay, I might as well just do that instead of looking through Google their name and get their phone number up there that way, or do the what we call opplysningen. Back then it was like 0180 or something like that. You could call an operator and get their number, or use the yellow pages. So I was like, okay, I'm still in the Cerwin Vega thing, and I had a dealer locator right in front of me, and all I had to do was type Norway in. So I did that, and all that came up was Hi-Fi Klubben for car audio and hi-fi. But I knew that Hi-Fi Klubben had stopped selling car audio like 3 or 4 years ago, like in the past, because they stopped it. They when the car audio boom got kind of like settled down, they stopped doing car audio, but they were still listed as a car audio dealer. But I knew, because I was at the Hi-Fi Klubben like twice a week, 3 times a week for over a decade. So I knew that they didn't have a car audio demo. I knew they didn't sell car audio. So, and then I'm sitting there trying to find where the frick is CMS Audio. Why are they not listed here? So I called CMS Audio, and they said that they had discontinued, or they hadn't renewed their distribution rights with Cerwin Vega for Pro Audio. And then a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, okay, we have car audio, we have pro audio. There's no distribution network in Norway for those two. So later that night, because of the time difference, California and Norway is like 9 hours, I remember my boss said, well, we're leaving now, and it's like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was like, well, I'm going to work a little bit late. So I stayed a little bit late, a couple of hours late, and I called Cerwin Vega, and that was like a call out of the blue, and I introduced myself and why I called. I talked to, I think her name was Marcy, something like that. Very nice girl. And she said, well, you should talk to the international sales manager, Stephanie Kilberg. I'm like, okay. Is she in? Can you put me through? She's like, sure, no problem. So I was patched through to Stephanie Kilberg, who answered the phone. And I introduced myself again and said, I told her why I called. And it was like it was almost like I had known her for years already, because the tone was so good. And she's like, yeah, we can look into that. That's not a problem. I said, well, what will it take? And it was like a dealer application thing. And if I remember correctly, she faxed it to me, or she emailed it to me, or something like that. And I printed it out and I sent it back in, and voila, became a Cerwin Vega distributor for car audio and pro audio. That was cool. So that just made things escalate really, really, really fast. Really fast. All of a sudden we went, that was like in, I think it was in October, November maybe. And then in February, we ordered hotel room, we ordered trip, plane tickets down to Germany, to Frankfurt, because we were going to attend the music messe in early April. And I remember we were so excited. It was like early February. And before that, before we went to music messe, we jumped in a little Euro cargo van. It's not like one of the big ones, but it's one of the small ones, like a Citroen or a Peugeot, or one of those small, Ford Connect things. It was one of those. We jumped in one of those. We drove down from Norway into Sweden, over the new bridge that they had made between Sweden and Denmark. We drove through Denmark. Well, we drove into Denmark, and we ended up at the headquarters at Cerwin Vega headquarters in Nørrager in Denmark, and we talked to a fellow named Michael Vestergaard Jensen, and that became a friendship that I still have today. Very, very nice guy. And we spent, I think it was 3 days down there, and we got a tour of the Cerwin Vega warehouse, and this was like in the same building as Dali and Hi-Fi Club. So we got a tour of that. We got a tour of the Dali facilities, and we talked to said hello to a few of the Dali people, and we went back up and really had a nice time. I remember I was sitting on the floor in there and just picking brochures and material that I could bring with me home, and really cool stuff. I remember we were listening to some demo speakers that he had put up there. We also was invited home to his private house, where he had a huge setup of Denon products, and he had the CVT series in his own house that he had hooked up as a home theater thing, and he gave us a demo in his own home of that. Really cool stuff. I mean, this was a cool period of time. And of course, when we got home after a few days, between then and between we went to music messe, I was thinking, hey, what the heck, we need more than this. This is not going to be enough. So I started contacting different companies. I started looking at, and then I was discovered by a fluke that Carver, because CMS Audio had also had Carver, and how I discovered Carver was CMS Audio had gotten the news, or gotten the rumors that we had become distributors for Cerwin Vega Pro Audio. So this one guy that I know at CMS, I can't remember his name, I haven't talked to him in like 10 years. He called me and he said, hey Roy, you know what? I have a bunch of recon kits and spare parts and tweeters and handles and all, like baskets that need to be reconed. I have a warehouse full of old Cerwin Vega stuff. Do you want to buy it? Can we agree on the price? So I talked to him. We went over there. We looked at what he had, and we agreed on a price. We bought everything. It was like a couple of thousand recon kits, and it was like 200 or 300 or 400 baskets of 18s, 12, 15s, 10s. I remember we got like 8 or 9 of those L1815 Elephant motor drivers woofers that had to be reconed. We got a bunch of the T250 10-inch. We got a lot of horns. It was a bunch of it, and we got a super nice price on it, so we bought it all. And then he said, well, just so you know, we're no longer Carver distributor either. So if you want to go for those, and I was like, yeah, I know Carver. I always liked Carver. So I contacted Carver, and they were like, well, Carver was then under Phoenix Gold. So I contacted them, and we, on the phone, agreed to meet at Music Messe 1 month later. So when we went down to Music Messe, we met up with first Cerwin Vega, and helped them out at the stand. That first year was a smaller stand. The second year had a bigger stand, but this was like a very intimate stand. I remember it was like kind of like they had speakers stacked on top of each other, kind of like in a bowling. It had like a slanted wall that went around. It was the V152 and the V253 or V52 or whatever. Very cool stuff. And we got some jackets, we got some t-shirts and stuff like that. And then we went to talk to Carver at their stand, and we signed up a dealer agreement with them. And we made an order. We ordered in amplifiers, cables, all kinds of stuff. And while we were down there, we were walking around because, you know, this is an exhibition thing. So as a dealer, this is where all the dealers go to like hook up with the manufacturers and stuff. So while we were walking around, we found a few companies that we hooked up with. One of them was Ciclotron in Brazil. So we got their dealership. We became a dealer for them for mixing consoles and mixing tables and speakers and amplifiers. We ordered a couple of those. We got some guitar pedals from another company they were associated with. We hooked up with a company called, I think it was Liverpool Guitars. And then we went home. And of course, throughout that year, we hooked up with more companies. We became a dealer for Sound Around, Lansar and Pyle. And then we hooked up with another company called Road Ready Flight Cases. We became a dealer for them. Michelle, I remember, worked for them. And the reason we became a Road Ready flight case dealer was because the guy who started Road Ready used to work for Cerwin Vega. So this was like a year later, I think it was, when we hooked up with Road Ready. We hooked up with True Technology and car audio amplifiers because John G quit Cerwin Vega, started True Technology. I can't remember the name of the guy who quit Cerwin Vega and started up Road Ready. But we got a dealership for both of those, so we ordered in a lot of that stuff. We sold quite a few sledgehammers and hammers and some of the more affordable amplifiers they had back in the day. We sold a couple, I think 2 or 3 copper series. But the hammers and the sledgehammers were really popular. And they were designed by John Fairchild. So that it was like we had some inside information, not inside information, but inside connections, so we could contact them and become dealers. And then of course things just escalated from there. We became a dealer for Gem Sound, I remember, just to have some cheap PA stuff, because not everyone could do Cerwin Vega or more expensive stuff. And then we became a Sapco dealer for Sapco car audio. And once Cerwin Vega sold to Stanton, things started to change. We went down to the Music Messe that year. We went to the stand. I know Stephanie Kilberg was still there, but it was then under the ownership of Stanton. And I felt that it wasn't the same chemistry anymore. So we started looking for another company, and that's how we hooked up with B52 Pro Audio. Killer speakers and Pro Audio gear, and we did really big stuff with that. And here I am today. 15 years later, still in the business. So now you know. Now you know how it's all started. I think there's probably a bunch of things I forgot to say, but you got the most, you got the spine, you got the legs, and you got the bone on it. There's much more meat to the bones that I have told you now, but I can't go into all of it. I could spend like 3 full days just talking about all the stuff. So it's a little bit scaled down today than compared to when it was at the most busy point in my life. Oh yeah, I was while we were running this company back in Norway, it was called Sound Pressure. I also hooked up with I forgot to say this, I forgot to tell this, but I hooked up with a musician called Ronnie Lee Tekera, and we became very good friends. And I spent quite a bit of time at his studio and his home. We had some parties up at Gjøvik. Every weekend we had some kind of a party. We went into the studio. There was some recordings there. I remember we started up a company together, Studio Nyhagen, and it was like that English thing. And he still had a Norwegian Studio Nyhagen, but we wanted to do something separate, so we opened up a second branch. So it was me and Ronnie and a couple other guys, and we did sign up to do studio work with Gorgoroth and 1349 and a couple other artists, and it was like really cool stuff. This was also in the same, I was involved in that for like 3 or 4 years, I think it was. And this was when TNT was releasing their My Religion album. So I remember traveling around the eastern and southern parts of Norway with TNT when they had released concerts in Oslo, in Lillestrøm, Hamar, Gjøvik, and different places, Sandefjord, stuff like that. And I remember sitting in Lillestrøm at something called Fagerborg Hotel, having lunch with the whole band, Ronny Litekere, Diesel Dahl, Morty Black, Tony Harnell. We were all down there at the Fagerborg Hotel having a beer and a lunch out on the outer patio serving area. So I remember I was going to a lot of concerts with that because we were involved with the studio. Yeah, that was another side thing that I did. And of course I have always had this DIY thing going on the side where I build stuff. A pretty wide range when it comes to my background. I've been involved in a lot of stuff when it comes to audio, and we had a huge rental department in our company where we rented out pro audio stuff to all kinds of parties and events, and something called the Russ in Norway. We had a few buses going on each year. We also did huge home theater things. We had a huge home theater demo, and we had in fact one of the scenes in Norway come to our company and our location, and they did a 4-page editorial review of us and our products and everything like that. And we scared the shit out of them when we turned up the sound. So I have experienced a lot of things in my life when it comes to audio, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for what I have now, and I do it because I'm so lucky that I can do what I love to do. And that's the only thing anyone can be hoping for, is to do whatever you love to do and like to do. I don't do it for the glamour, I don't do it for the money, I don't do it for anything like that. I do it because I love working with sound equipment. So there you go. I'm sure there's a bunch of things I haven't even mentioned. So, but like I said, it was the spine, it was the bones, and all the meat on the bones. If I was going to talk about all that, I'd give me at least 3 or 4 days. But that was it, guys. Until next time, take care.